Australian Bitcoin podcast, presented by HardBlock, Australia's first Bitcoin-only exchange.
Hello and welcome to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. Today is March 21st, 2025. And for this news episode, we'll be covering the latest news of the last 2 weeks. And joining us is a very special guest, one of the organizers of the Bitcoin Sydney meetup, the person whose name shitcoiners all over Australia, when they hear his name, they soil their pants in fear because he destroys them so badly. So a very special guest, the one and only JP. How are you, JP?
G'day, Daniel. Good, thanks. Good to be with you. Thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, well, it's a very accurate introduction. Yeah, I mean, you've been educating people and hosting the Bitcoin Sydney meetup, helping educate people about Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is valuable and why they should invest in Bitcoins, not shitcoins, for a long time. So yeah, you've made a huge contribution to the community. So it's great to have you on.
Very kind of you to say. And yeah, that's been a great interest of mine for many years now, running the meetup in Sydney since 2019. And so it's been a very enjoyable thing to do, very interesting, met lots of great people and always keen to spread the good news, to coin a phrase.
Right. And speaking of community, just recently we had what is the biggest Bitcoin event in Australia, Bitcoin Alive. And you were obviously at the conference. You were one of the MCs, right?
Yes, another fantastic event this year. Again, credit must go to Chris, Dylan and Jess, the main organisers of that conference, for putting together what is a very, very solid Bitcoin event. Every Bitcoiner in Australia looks at that and says that's the gold standard for signal, not noise, and it was my honour to be one of the main stage MCs, and also had a talk and appeared on a panel alongside Knut Svanholm and James Check. So a big day for everybody, the biggest Bitcoin day of the year, and if you haven't gotten along to one of those before, I certainly encourage you to consider getting a ticket. I believe they'll probably be going on sale again for next year very shortly, if I understand Chris and Dylan correctly there.
Yeah. So, like, what was your takeaways from this year's events? Did you have any favorite talks or kind of things that kind of piqued your interest?
There are a couple of things. I'm always very much enjoy James Check's talks. He's a member of our community here in Sydney, and has not only has he been very generous with his time at our meetups, but also gave a great opening presentation about how there is no second best Bitcoin to Bitcoin.
And his talks are always very popular.
They are, and it's and he's earned his fame, for want of a better word, for the very clear way in which he expresses his ideas, particularly, and the sober way in which he presents the ideas as well. I use that word sober in terms of with movements like this, there can be a lot of hype, and people can get a little carried away with the hopium and outlandish predictions, particularly when it comes to price. Although that's sort of directionally correct with respect to Bitcoin, and never probably did anyone a great deal of harm if they went along with it, sometimes it can tend to overstate the case a little bit and risks leaving people disappointed. And it can be a bit more emotionally driven, whereas James's approach is always one of an evidence and data-driven one, which is also sometimes not afraid to say things or to make predictions that might not be the most palatable to the ears of people who are hoping for, the more exaggerated outcomes.
Right. And just for people who aren't familiar with James Check, he's basically does Bitcoin price analysis
mostly price analysis, but it's based on on-chain on-chain data, which is something that hasn't existed for other asset classes before. The ability to actually see the asset moving in real time before it actually has an impact on the market itself. There's a lot that can be inferred from that. And again, it's a certain tool that's due to the nature of Bitcoin itself that gives you that level of insight. But it's probably best to ask James himself about all of those sorts of topics. I'm sure he'd be delighted to appear. I'm sure
he's come on before. Like for me, for the conference, we like HardBlock was one of the sponsors. We also had like a booth. So actually, because I was at the booth quite a lot and talking to people, so I actually didn't get the chance to see many of the talks.
After James's talk, there was a Bitcoin policy introduction. So we had the Libertarian Party of Australia deliver their official Bitcoin policy for the first time. That was unveiled at the conference. I hasten to add that the Libertarian Party is so far the only party that has shown any level of engagement or interest at all in Bitcoin. The other parties, the other political parties, particularly the major parties, have been approached, but their attitude, just like it is the attitude of people whose job it should be to actually understand phenomena like this, such as the head of the Reserve Bank, is just to sort of throw their hands up and say, I don't know, or almost be proud of their ignorance, or proud of the fact that they, or certainly unashamed of the fact that they know absolutely nothing about it, when all of the information is there to get. You have to be it takes a particular willfulness at this point to remain ignorant of what Bitcoin is, particularly, and I don't say that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but I say that in the particular case where your role in society or your job mean that it would be something that would behove you to know a great deal about in order to do your job properly. And unfortunately, there's a great many, particularly journalists in this country, so-called financial experts, particularly those in the obviously in the fiat system, and the politicians who have no shame at all in throwing their hands up, admitting that they know nothing, and also showing just a distinct lack of any curiosity to remedy that situation.
Well, I feel when you're talking about this, maybe you have in mind there was recently an event where on the House Standing Committee, I think there was like somebody from the central bank, from Australia's Reserve Bank, got asked about Bitcoin, and they said they understand it, and then they proceeded to make these
absurd.
Talk about it. Like I'm not sure. Have you
talk about it in the way that someone who knows nothing about it would talk about it. Yeah,
You've seen. I'm actually have it here. I'm gonna try and share it, and hopefully it comes out on the podcast. Okay. I'm gonna just share it with you. Like you've seen this, JP?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have seen that. Okay. That's Michelle Bullock of the Reserve Bank again.
Yeah.
The person. I mean, imagine it doesn't. It's not as though it really doesn't take hundreds of hours. You can in a few hours at least learn the minimum amount that it explains to you. Okay, there's at least something there which is worthy of further explanation. I'm not suggesting that within a few hours someone can understand how it all works, but you can at least gain an appreciation of the fact, okay, there is actually something here. There is actually a way in which money itself is being done here that wasn't possible before, and brings very unique advantages to the table in terms of how humans have ever done money before.
Right.
It doesn't take hours and hours to figure that out. But these people don't show any evidence of having even done the slightest amount of work, despite their role in society and and not to mention the enormous amounts of money they get paid.
Right. So I'll just play, because I've got the clips, I'll play it so the audience can know what we're talking about, okay?
Much bigger role in payments in the economy. That's what I understand. I understand Bitcoin.
Right. Okay. Good.
I don't understand why people think that somehow Bitcoin is going to have this increasingly important role in the payment system. I just don't see it.
Yeah, why is that? Because
back to the same point, it doesn't serve the purpose of money. It doesn't have a solid value. You can't be guaranteed that what it's worth today, it will be worth the same thing tomorrow. It's extremely slow relative to other payment systems. You can get transactions through in milliseconds in other payment systems. It's not certain in the sense that, as you know.
Okay, I would just stop sharing there. By the way, could you hear that when I was sharing it?
Yeah, I could. Yeah. I mean, it just you've jogged my memory there as to more of the non-points she made.
Yeah. I mean, clearly she doesn't know about Lightning Network.
Well, I'm not even convinced. I'm not even convinced from that she even understands what money is. Yeah. Really,
exactly. Like just like
clearly,
she looks. It's like a bureaucrat. Like just goes through like. She reminds me of somebody who just like like.
Like you and I could have answered. You and I could have dealt with those objections in 2 seconds if she'd bothered to engage with people who actually know anything about this.
It's somebody like reminds me of in school when you have people who, for like a subject, they kind of memorize how to pass a subject, and like they pass it because they just memorize like they do, all
that's
the
very
answers,
interesting.
but without having like an in-depth understanding of the actual topic. And that's how like these bureaucrats get there.
That's how they rise to that position. They're not rising to that position from having thought for themselves. They've rose to that position about having aced tests, done very well in exams, and scored the marks to get to the next level.
Yeah, they said what they've done. They kind of memorized what they have to memorize without actually having an understanding or kind of like some fundamental knowledge about things. That's what she reminds me of.
No, exactly. And of course, she's not alone in that. And, our community has stood, proud and ready to assist with any of these sorts of objections. These are understandable objections, I think, that people could have. I mean, I've always taken the line I start out whenever I've sort of tried to explain Bitcoin, particularly to a skeptical audience, in reassuring them that their skepticism is quite natural and correct initially, because Bitcoin does make fairly extraordinary claims for what it's able to do. You're first of all, most notably, you're proposing that this thing that's essentially immaterial should be worth, or rather is worth, commanding a price of $130,000 or something like that. So first of all, you're asking people to accept why that should be so. That's a rather extraordinary thing for something that up until relatively recently was something that you couldn't even put a price on as such, some immaterial thing like that. And second of all, again, you're making the claim that you're doing something, that the form of money has been created that was not possible before, that being a kind of money whereby there's no intermediary, no third parties, and no one entity can control the network, yet somehow we achieve consensus on the status of the ledger, and it all's just going to work, and that it isn't going to fail and die in a blaze of glory. And there's a number of things you have to go through to convince. But the good thing about Bitcoin is that as Bitcoiners, there are very, very good answers to all of these questions, which we're happy to give. And once understood, make it perfectly clear why it is the phenomenon that it is.
Right. And so, but going back to like Bitcoin Live and the Libertarian Party. So the Libertarian Party at Bitcoin Live, they announced their Bitcoin policy. I'll just quickly like summarize the policy and then you can comment about it. So the policy is first, like there's a few points. The first point is for Bitcoin miners, regulatory normalization for Bitcoin miners and access to the Australian energy market operators. Second part, the right to self-custody Bitcoin in Australia. Third part, no digital ID and Bitcoin privacy, and support for Bitcoin privacy. And fourth, support for creating a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Mm-hmm. So those were the four policies announced. In addition to that, they already had a policy of no capital gains tax on Bitcoin. That was an earlier policy. And they also just recently accepted Bitcoin donations.
Mm-hmm.
themselves.
So the Libertarian Party, again, uniquely among political parties, has actually bothered to engage with the Bitcoin community. In fact, it's got some Bitcoin enthusiasts involved at the highest levels of the party, and they've reached out. They don't just assume to know everything. They've reached out and spoken to the people who understand Bitcoin best, and that's Bitcoiners. And I suspect that a number of those policies would be considered, this is a sort of like a wish list. Like, politics being what it is that although this might be a wish list of items that we'd all love to see there, perhaps in a practical sense, maybe only a couple of those get over the line once it's all once you have to contend with opposition parties and those with differently aligned interests. But certainly the first, I think you mentioned the Bitcoin mining, access to energy. That's been a problem for miners in this country. Have often had to be very cagey about what they're using their energy for if they've had to get access to a very large amount of energy to run their operations. In certain cases, they've had to be cagey about that because of the risk that comes with again it's mostly comes from ignorance, but in essentially being denied the right to use that energy if for that purpose. Things like the capital gains tax, look, that'd be very nice to have, but it's a difficult one to sort of. What do you say if you put that policy through? What do you say to somebody who has another kind of investment? Well, I guess you wouldn't. I suppose you'd have to stop calling Bitcoin an investment, but you've got to think of how that might be a difficult one to sell to somebody who has had to pay capital gains on something they happen to have owned and moved and sold.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And of course, I also wonder if capital gains taxes on Bitcoin may be one of the things that's preventing a lot of selling of Bitcoin from occurring. You know what I mean? Like, you think if I was to sell, you're always thinking about, I'm going to have to pay a big chunk. I'm going to lose essentially a chunk of my net worth in the taxes I pay if I do that. We don't want to encourage selling of Bitcoin, do we?
We're trying to punish sellers, and
that's it. It's a sort of
we're promoting Bitcoin. We're not trying to, but actually we're kind of promoting people who hold Bitcoin.
That's right. I mean, as good as it would be, I mean, ultimately, I think we all want to benefit from our Bitcoin in some way, and that may involve, say, buying a house with it at some point like that, and that is a capital gains taxable event because, after all, Bitcoin is money. And as money, it's has to be able to be redeemed for goods and services at some point. So, yeah, it would be nice if you could, would help to use it as money if you didn't have to lose if you didn't have to basically add another, whatever the capital gains tax amount is you owe on top of what it is you're spending. So, $1 million house, which gets you practically nothing in Australia now, essentially you have to take, maybe $1,000,013 off the table once you've paid the taxes. So you've still got your $1 million left to buy the house. I don't think, of course, anyone who understands Bitcoin would ever countenance sort of selling Bitcoin and just going back to fiat. No, I mean, but certainly people might want to buy stuff with their Bitcoin. After all, as I said, they have to benefit from it in some way, and it's a nasty sting in the tail to get just to spend your money. To have to spend 30% more. Just jog my memory. What was one of the other ones you mentioned?
The mining normalization, right to self-custody.
Oh, yes, right to self-custody. See, again, that's something that's been under threat in previous governments. I mean, with things like, I believe it was the travel rule. You must have, I'm sure that you've dealt with numerous regulatory issues regarding your ability. Like, there was some question as to whether or not people could even have their own wallets at some point, and whether or not wallets would have to be custodial. Being self-custodying your Bitcoin is one of the most important aspects of Bitcoin. It's the idea being, if you're not self-custodying your Bitcoin, you don't own Bitcoin. You've just got your money with a third-party custodian again, and you're back to square one. You're back to what all of the problems of the fiat world that Bitcoin was specifically discovered or invented to take us to get us away from, and of course, I believe that Bitcoin is personal responsibility writ large. There's no one to save you if you get it wrong. Now, that's not a bug, it's a feature. Personal responsibility is something that people have been all too willing to eschew and sort of give up freedom in exchange for having governments take care of them for far too long. That's not the Libertarian way, and so it should not be surprising that the Libertarian Party would promote self-custody, because it is the ultimate expression of you taking personal responsibility for your money. So long as it's with someone else is taking responsibility for it, but as well as they're taking responsibility for it, they can also lose it or take it from you, which is what you don't want. So you're giving up that freedom of being your own bank.
That's right. Yeah. It's very important in Bitcoin. And like going back to Bitcoin Alive, one thing I enjoyed the conference, and it was great. One of the things I like about Bitcoin Live, a lot of the Bitcoiners from all over Australia converge there, and it's a great opportunity to kind of meet, like such as yourself, but there's everybody from other parts of Australia. So it's great to kind of meet up with everybody there. But it was a little bit disappointing. The actual attendance wasn't as high as maybe I thought. Part of that was like the Brisbane cyclone.
That's right. A lot of unfortunately, we did. Fortunately, few of these sort of problems really sort of get through to the audience, which is the whole point of when you're running an event. You want to be able to take care of any issues behind the scenes. But yes, there were a number of attendees that had their flights cancelled from the Brisbane area due to the cyclone, and a couple of the speakers as well. Pete Evans unfortunately wasn't able to make it down. Danny Knowles wasn't able to make it down either for his interview. However, there was another highlight. We had Gabrielle Shipton back from now under completely different circumstances after the release of Julian Assange, and how the movement that they created in terms of getting Julian Assange out might help also free other victims of political oppression, essentially. I mean, this is not... Political oppression used to be something that we were brought up thinking was the province of third world countries like El Salvador. That used to be that was El Salvador when I was at school, was the literal textbook case study of political oppression. And ever since they went on a Bitcoin standard and their new president, Bukele, they've become essentially a beacon of freedom and personal responsibility for citizens in countries like ours all around the world. We were labouring under lockdowns while Bukele was putting El Salvador on a Bitcoin standard. So have the tables turned, and so we have our own our Western so-called Western democracies. We have our own political victims. Do our own political persecutions.
I just heard
Snowden, Assange. But anyway, that was a good one to hear.
I just had a thought it would be really cool. Maybe this will happen, but if one day Julian Assange comes to Bitcoin Alive, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame the guy though for wanting to keep a completely low profile, because he could say potentially one thing could completely destroy the deal that he had to do. Like he had to basically, and I don't blame him. I mean, he living like that. And let's face it. I mean, I'm not even sure what percentage of the Australian population or even the population of the Western countries that he was essentially advocating on behalf of by exposing the crimes of their own governments are even grateful to him. I mean, how many normies do you go out and talk to who still think that like what he did was essentially, treasonous, or that, that their government is their friend? And who just don't understand any of this stuff at all and don't really care, just sleepwalk their way into whatever control grid is being put up to constrain them. And so I wouldn't blame the guy to say, well, you know what, like, yeah, I mean, not even our own. It was only a relatively small subset of people that were making lots and lots of noise about this for many, many years that finally got him out.
Well, I mean, he was demonized and he was slandered. Yeah. And the unfortunate thing is slander works
If you can't, well, that's the other thing.
Slander works. I remember, like, when he was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. I remember there was one article on ABC News. It was basically like a slanderous article, just trying to attack his character. But like, basically, the premise of the article was, maybe you remember this, but basically how he has a cat and he hasn't been cleaning after his cat in his Ecuadorian embassy. And
well, I mean, if you want to take it to the next extreme, there was the whole sexual assault allegations.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean,
again, it's the same old playbook.
It's just and that's obviously, but that's like, at least like sexual assault. If it was like, it wasn't true, but if it was true, it was like, okay. But this is like, why are you talking about his cat? Like, they were saying an article that he's not cleaning up after his cat and he's annoying the people at the embassy. Just like trying to like.
Yeah, it's just smears and lies.
Smears. Just smears. Like, what kind of journalism talk about his cat? Like,
well, this is the playbook, though. I mean, we've seen that playbook with any opponents of whenever there's an opponent of essentially the existing establishment. I mean, look, I suppose you could say Trump is the best example of that. I mean, you saw that the character assassination failed. Then they tried to jail him. That failed. And then, whether you particularly believe that there was any coordinated effort, when that fails, inevitably the assassination attempts start. And there were two extremely strong assassinations. In fact, the very same thing was, I mean, Hillary Clinton is on record in a meeting and literally saying, Sarge, can't we just drone this bastard?
Yeah.
Literally countenancing the use of deadly weapons to take out essentially a person who was a whistleblower, someone who blew the whistle on the crimes of government, someone who never committed any other crimes, committed any violence whatsoever, and a high-ranking member of the U.S. government at the time, the Secretary of State, literally suggested that drones be used to take him out, and however many other people happen to have been in the vicinity.
Yeah,
disgusting.
Yeah. And just going on that slander topic, I'm not sure if you know about this, but the word, the name devil comes from ancient Greek and means one who engages in slander. I'm not sure if you know about JP, but that's like, like, I'm not making a religious argument, but that's like where the origin, it was considered like slander is kind of the devil's mind too.
Well, in a more formal
that's
way,
where the name comes.
I suppose.
From.
I mean, the more formal description of what you've just said there is, it's an ad hominem attack. It has no bearing on the truth value of any of the revelations that Assange made, or of his or of any of the facts in play.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
It's used to sway people to get them offside so that they're not going to support the cause.
Right, exactly. But anyway, moving on to some avenues. So something else that happened, and we did, in previous podcasts we kind of discussed this a little bit, but there was in United States there was the pro-Bitcoin position, and just after our previous podcast was the Crypto Council in the United States. And so as a result of that Crypto Council, it was established that there will be, in the United States, a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So before that, we weren't sure, is it going to be a crypto shitcoin reserve? What is it? But so it's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve.
Yeah, and a separate shitcoin stockpile.
Yeah.
So that distinction wasn't initially made clear. When that news came out, of course, a lot of people got very upset thinking, we elected a shitcoin, and maybe they still did. That's a different question. But initially when it was announced, there wasn't a clear distinction there. It looked like it was going to be a non-event because all the shitcoins and Bitcoin would have been sort of given an equal footing and all piled into one big useless pile, that would have essentially the shitcoins would have defeated any good holding any Bitcoin on the books would have done. But like a lot of things Trump does, sometimes these things start off as kind of like an ambit claim, and then which sort of everyone gets upset about. But then you kind of get the clarification later on, and the real thing, and it's not as bad as that, or it's a lot better. And whereas there might have been more opposition to it if you'd just given the final thing straight away, now people are kind of relieved. Oh, that's not too bad. Now we're getting the Bitcoin reserve here, and the shitcoin stockpile is only going to be some little separate thing. And so now everyone's a lot more happy about it than they would have been if you'd just gone straight to that distinction in the first place.
Yeah, and the other thing people like were criticizing, like, is it going to be using tax dollars, or how is it going to be obtained? So basically, it's going to be obtained. The United States government already has Bitcoin that it has seized through various law enforcement actions.
Yeah.
So it's going to hold.
And also, I believe they could obtain from selling other things, so they could potentially sell gold.
Yeah,
and use that to fund. Yeah. But it's supposed to be no net
tax neutral. They said
tax neutral. Yeah.
So right now they have 200,000 Bitcoin, I believe, in their Bitcoin strategic reserve. So they also seized in the past some altcoins, and that's going to go into the stockpile. And I guess the difference between the stockpile and the Bitcoin strategic reserve, they plan to increase the Bitcoin stockpile, but only through tax neutral kind of
and of course even I mean, often the libertarian position on this thing is that government shouldn't be taking taxpayers' money and putting it in, so at least it more or less fits that side of things. But there's been a certain amount of Bitcoin comment. This actually came up on another popular session at Bitcoin Alive. In fact, I was told that it ended up being the most popular session. It was held on the Nakamoto stage upstairs, which is normally a sort of a smaller side stage. And that was simply like what's called the Bitcoin speed run. So it was James Check, Knut Svanholm, another distinguished international guest that came down to speak at the conference. And my good self happened to be on that panel. And one of the topics that came up was this idea that Bitcoin was supposed to separate money and state, but with the adoption of Bitcoin by government, we're essentially blurring those lines again. And the point that I make to that is that, well, actually, no, there's a distinction. It was supposed to separate the control of money from state. The idea of the states ever buying Bitcoin, rather than being something that is somehow antithetical to Bitcoin. In fact, it was predicted. People like myself who've been bullish on Bitcoin for 10 or 12 years now, whenever we'd often get confronted, you must have had this thing, you must have had this too. Someone will come and say, oh, the government's just going to ban it. Right? You've heard that objection.
Yeah, of course.
The government's going to ban it. Yeah. And of course, we would say very often, no, they're not going to ban it. They're actually far more likely to having the same kind of game theory go on that we've personally had go on, and that is to realize the benefits of owning it themselves. So the very game theory, so therefore they're much more likely to actually purchase Bitcoin than ban it. So as Bitcoiners, we therefore shouldn't be upset when our predictions about Bitcoin, in that respect, Bitcoin's game theory, end up coming true by governments making the exact same judgment about it as we personally did when we first found out about it.
Yeah, and I just want to, I think that's a really good point you made. Like, I would just kind of emphasize it. Bitcoin, it's not about like separating money from state. It's more about separating governments' control of
the money from state.
But
they can't print any more of it.
Yeah,
they've got to
control it.
They can't, and they don't have it. And the one government that happens to have what is known as the exorbitant privilege of having its currency as being the world reserve currency, that doesn't exist in Bitcoin. The one thing, I mean, it's my sort of version of, I guess, a lot of people have a certain conspiracy theory about, or not. I don't I'm not putting this forward as though it's true. It's merely a speculation, but among many possible speculations about the origins of Bitcoin, and but one possible explanation might be, it could well be an actual white hat operation done by some government entity like the NSA, who they just ran the game theory. They realized, okay, there's only a certain amount of time that the US dollar can prevail as being the world reserve currency. That leaves two possible futures. One possible future means that some other country ends up having that exorbitant privilege of having its currency be the world reserve currency. The other possible future is that nobody has that privilege ever again. And that future is now possible now that Bitcoin exists. It always had to be someone before. But the moment Bitcoin came into existence, that second possibility now existed for it now to be nobody. And so if you're America and realize that the loss of reserve currency, world reserve currency status is inevitable, what would you rather see happen? Would you rather China get it? Would you rather Russia get it? Would you rather the European Union get it? Or would you rather no one has it? And so there's the game theory as to why not only maybe, I don't know, that it could have been some actual white hat type thing. I don't really think it is, but why it could be. But also why the game theory for governments works out, just as we predicted way back when people told us that governments would just ban Bitcoin. No, they won't. They're going to more likely to do what they're now doing. And so I think we kind of ought to be a little happy about being right about that.
Yeah. And the other kind of controversy or discussion point about the Bitcoin strategic reserve in the United States was whether it's actually a nothing burger or a big deal. And people are on two sides. Some people say, well, this is a nothing burger because basically, like, the United States already held these Bitcoins and still holds. So like, well, this is just nothing. And some people say, well, it is a big deal for other reasons.
Well, that's the question. I mean, is it a nothing burger from a demand price perspective? Like if they're just going to only sit on the Bitcoin that they already own, then they're not going to put any upward price pressure on Bitcoin, like a lot of people were predicting would occur. You know, you get these people saying, we're going to $1 million this year, this sort of thing. Let's just try to keep our head above 100,000. We've got all of this great news, and we're just sitting on $84,500 at the moment with all of that good news already known. Heaven forfend what might happen if some unexpectedly bad news suddenly comes through the pipeline, because all the good news we already know. I don't know what better news could come along after this, but look, at the very least, it may be a nothing burger from that perspective. However, it's certainly not a nothing burger when it comes to finally putting a lid, as I just mentioned, on that whole argument, that whole degree of uncertainty that a lot of other people might have had about entering the market, about governments potentially banning it. Because for better or worse, we mightn't be terribly impressed by governments legitimizing things because we think for ourselves, but and again have a more libertarian leaning perspective. But that's not true of most people in the world. Most people in the world are very much led by what the establishment is telling them, what the orthodoxy is, what the government says, what the experts say. We learned this all too well throughout COVID, unfortunately. So when it comes to this, it should provide a great amount of reassurance to markets now that some nasty government ban, not that it ever would have killed Bitcoin, we know that. But again, you've got to put yourself in the mind of those people that are thinking of dipping their toe in the water, or even putting a great deal more of their savings into Bitcoin, and that it's now relatively safe from one of the biggest objections that we would often have to face when explaining Bitcoin to people.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing it does, it kind of shifts the Overton window, legitimizes like Bitcoin's like, okay, because everywhere, like in Australia and everywhere in the world, people look up to what the United States is doing, and if kind of they're doing it, makes it more legitimate. And
so many other countries in the world will now follow. I mean, because you can't now, you can't as a country now get left behind with this, because you'll be at a distinct disadvantage now. And that's again the game theory that we always understood.
It sparks FOMO among other countries, doesn't it? It's like, we're doing it, maybe we should do it also.
That's it. Yeah.
And like, in the Libertarian Party, they announced their policy for supporting a Bitcoin strategic reserve. They announced that at Bitcoin Live. And,
they did. But again, whether or not in reality, like again, the Libertarian Party, I think it has so far one upper house seat in the New South Wales state government. I I don't know what its electoral prospects are for actually getting more representation at a federal level, but
yeah, but at least it starts the discussion.
It starts the discussion, exactly.
Starts the discussion, and it puts that kind of on the agenda, and it makes it kind of seem more realistic and like, like, okay, well, this isn't like just some loony,
crazy
unfortunately policy. This is like what Australia's biggest ally is doing, so we should be doing it also.
But I fear that Australia will be possibly one of the last countries to sort of, again, it's just the nature of the political establishment that we have, will be one of the last countries to get it. And if you are, and as a country, will be potentially worse off for it.
Yeah, I agree. Something else I just want, like, before we finish up, was one thing I wanted to show you for you to comment on. So, are you aware of what DECA is? DECA. So it was the Blockchain Australia organization.
DECA.
So yeah, we're very branded versions. We're not even called Blockchain Australia.
Sorry, DECA. Yes.
DECA,
Okay, they've given themselves the more general name of digital.
It already like Bitcoin. Okay, we want more general like blockchain.
Well,
okay, and now it's like even more general like DECA.
Exactly.
Like,
I mean, blockchain was a buzzword that utterly failed in the market, and it was as we said it would, because I could talk a long time about that. And so now but in a way, I mean, at least it's a bit more. They're not labouring now under the I felt that when they called themselves blockchain and things like that, it was essentially labouring under a whole false pretense, as though there was anything like novel or interesting in what they were doing.
Yeah. But but to give
now at least it's just digital currencies, which could be anything. I mean, the money that you use in your normal bank account is a digital currency.
Yeah. So but for those who don't know, so DECA is the kind of like an industry body. It was supposed to be like crypto industry and everything like that. But like some of us in the Bitcoin community didn't like some of the things that DECA was doing. And there were some scammers involved in it, and it was very kind of like moving away from Bitcoin. So we didn't support, and we created.
It never had anything to do. It never had anything to do with Bitcoin. It never had anything to do with Bitcoin. In fact, all it was the sort of, again, the whole website was sort of the typical shitcoiner like logo vomit and mugshots all down the page. I often joked, as soon as there was another scandal, that'll be another there'll be another mugshot to be removed from the Blockchain Australia website. That frequently happened. They were big on those, and very often, there was some crypto scandal or something unscrupulous, and another mugshot had to come down. Better call the webmaster because it was, and that would just keep happening. And you don't have those problems in Bitcoin.
So I just want to show something else. I'll show another video. So I'm not sure, you probably haven't seen this one. So this is actually a YouTube video by somebody from DECA, one of the chairmen of one of the board members, I think, from DECA, and and he's interviewing somebody, the assistant governor for financial systems in Australia. So can you see that? Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I'm just going to play this. So this is Paul Durham, DECA chair. So he's one of the chair, and he's doing an interview. So I'll play this clip for you. Ready?
The Toyota Camry system rail works. Okay, the more modern one, that what Brad you've called the Ferrari, is the new payments platform. I don't have to type in a BSB or an account number. I can type in something like an email address or a mobile number. It's much easier. It's quicker. The funds are instantly settled using the RBA's fast settlement service. Okay, so it's a different platform. It's immediate, nearly always immediate, and that's sort of the newer, faster rail. Now, there's a third future money rail, which I think you've put into a number of categories, Brad. You've got the unbacked crypto like Bitcoin. Some people could pay that $1,000 invoice using Bitcoin. It's clunky, it's expensive, it's slow. The merchant's probably not going to accept it. There's also backed crypto.
Okay.
Yeah, again, the whole look. This goes back to, again, the whole premise of shitcoinery and blockchain was always that these things don't have any use case if Bitcoin works. Okay, and of course Bitcoin does work, and so their whole premise involves having to basically tell lies about Bitcoin in order to justify the existence of their more centralized alternatives. Nothing they're doing there, nothing. It's not innovative just to move one ledger entry, a figure on one side of a ledger to another side of a ledger. That's not the innovative part of Bitcoin, the fact that you can kind of do that stuff digitally. That's just a database entry update and indeed all of the only thing any of their projects ultimately have ever done. Sorry, go on.
I just thought it could be just like, before, for me, it's like a new law for DECA. Before
it is.
Like,
they've never had anyone crypto,
but now we're trashing Bitcoin. We're trashing.
They don't know anything. These people don't know anything. They don't know anything about Bitcoin. They're marketeers. All of these people. I've known them and dealt with them way back. It's all a giant marketing exercise. There's not really any rigorous technical understanding of anything. No understanding of game theory. No understanding of the incentives. Certainly no understanding of the way Bitcoin works. No understanding of even blockchain. They don't even understand that even blockchain itself was developed in 1992 and didn't have any use cases until Bitcoin actually combined it with all of the other technology that came together to make it in order to actually make it useful. It didn't suddenly then remain useful after those idiots pulled all of the stuff back off of it and declared that the underlying technology was what was important and not Bitcoin. That's been their whole raison d'etre, and of course it's gone nowhere. It's failed everywhere it's been tried. The biggest, I think, the most notable, the Australian Stock Exchange a few years ago tried to run a blockchain platform, spent millions of dollars, and ultimately had to cancel the project because it didn't do anything. It didn't work.
Yeah, but that's, I know, like people might not agree with me, but I think the kind of trials of digital, like the kind of dollar thing that we're trying to do, like I think nothing's really released about that because we actually don't know what we're doing.
Well, it's central bank. These people are cheering on. These people are the complete antithesis of what Bitcoin is all about. And funnily, and they always have been. I mean, these are the people that are literally cheering on the advent of central bank digital currencies. And indeed, it's the wet dream of Ethereum, of the Ethereum people, that their chain be the bedrock of government-mandated central bank digital currencies. What could be more antithetical to the discovery of Bitcoin than that?
Yeah. Anyway, but JP, I think we're kind of at the 47-minute mark. I don't know, is there anything else you want to discuss for the news? Anything else?
I just, if you're in Sydney, please come and join us at Bitcoin Sydney. Our meetup is on every second Wednesday of the month. You can find our events at www.bitcoinsydney.org, and I'm JP_technology on Twitter.
Yeah, thanks JP for coming along to our podcast, and thanks for everything you do in the Bitcoin
Daniel.
community. It was great to have
you.
And if you're in Sydney, come to the Bitcoin Sydney meetup, and you can meet JP there, and he can educate you about everything you need or want to know about Bitcoin.
Will do. Thank you, Daniel. Good talking to you.
Thanks, JP.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Australian Bitcoin podcast, presented by HardBlock, Australia's first Bitcoin-only exchange.